Well, this actually is a nice pivot into like business, because like our ideas of business and the approach to business are very different, and I think particularly with that generation where my dad had a charted path. Like he came to this country young, he got his PhD.
Welcome back to another episode of the Intrepidus Podcast with your hosts Dan and Anthony. Today our special guest is Adam Vohra with ARV Enterprises, also a keynote speaker, and a couple more things, podcast host,
Yes,
a
sir.
plethora of other things. Tell us a little bit about what you do, Adam.
Yeah, man. I'm based in Connecticut. I live in Fairfield, Connecticut. My business is based in Greenwich, Connecticut, and I am the founder and CEO of ARV Enterprises. We do event management. Initially, I had launched it as a nonprofit consulting firm, and I pivoted to just the event management component. I also, dabble in the public speaking space and have spoken at several different events. So, I do consider myself a keynote speaker. And then I host my own podcast, the Finding Purpose Podcast, which was really a culmination of my own personal journey where I wanted to lean into purpose and lean into learning other people's stories behind purpose.
Right. So tell us a little, we got a lot to unbox here.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about ARV first.
Okay.
And then tell us a little bit about your podcast and what actually drove you to become a keynote speaker.
Yeah. So, I'm kind of going to go backwards because,
Sure.
it makes sense to go that way. One of the big reasons why I jumped into the speaking space was because, I am a person in recovery. And, to talk a little bit about my past, I was very much jumped into alcoholism and addiction through my 20s, really spearheaded by a lot of issues that I had pertaining to my family and pertaining to grief and whatnot, that kind of peppered my 20s. And, that only just further fueled my alcoholism where, I very much was a taker for a lot of my life. And, when I finally got sober 3 years ago, I had to do a lot of work on myself, and I had to understand that, the mindset that I had adopted through my addiction and alcoholism wasn't serving me, and it was more important for me to find a channel to give back. A huge part of that was I attributed a lot of shame to my story. And in attributing a lot of shame, it was really important for me to start sharing my story. So, I started working at Equinox, and I was working in the sales department, and I was sitting there and I was meeting all these folks, and they would come in, man, and they were top performers. And everyone always asked me, they're like, how many famous people do you meet at Equinox? And I'm like, I don't know, but I do know that they're very successful at what they do. And, maybe they're at the top of their game in whatever field. They weren't celebrities per se, but they were well known in their communities. But these folks who were killers were coming in each day, every single day, consistently, always trying to get better. That was so foreign to the mindset that I had adopted previously. I was working in high-end restaurants. I was bartending, I was serving, I was managing in these restaurants. And, granted, I had that exposure to that kind of clientele.
Yeah, demographic.
But at the end of the day, I was also very much bogged down by my own alcoholism, and it fueled it more. Now seeing it in that climate, I was like, wow, this is how they operate on a day to day. Because and the thing is that really struck me was they were always willing to help. They were always willing to give advice. They were always willing to bring people up with them. And one promise I made to myself when I got sober was I am going to live the opposite of the way that I was living prior. And I had to make that conscious decision. So where I was like sleeping in, it's like, no, like I'm going to wake up diligently at 5 a.m. Where I wasn't being active, no, I'm going to go to the gym I'll be at the gym by 7, So those are the kind of habits that I had to incorporate into my life. And one of those things was meeting, one of the trainers there was in this personal development community called Warm Heart Life. And he was like, yo, like my boy, like he hosts a public speaking school. You should do it. And I kept putting it off. And he does them like throughout the country. He does them in Stamford, Connecticut. And then he does one in Laguna Beach. He does one in Miami. They just finished the Miami one. And they had a Chicago one coming up. And I was like, fuck it. Like, can I curse?
Yeah.
Okay. I was like, fuck it. Like, I'm gonna go. I was like, at the very least, I get a free trip out of Chicago. I'd never been to Chicago, so I go there and I'm sitting in a room. There's about like 20 of us, and I write this really heartfelt story, like things that I have only shared with a few people on my recovery journey, and talking about like the passing of my mother, talking about finding out, I was adopted when I was 12. Those kind of stories. And it was the first time I shared that in just like a general room. And this is a story that I had a lot of shame to, but when I was done, people came up to me and they're like, man, like that was so powerful, and that's when I first was able to see that there is value to my story. I shouldn't be ashamed of it because it could help others. So I jumped into the public speaking space there. During that period of time, meeting all these folks, when I was asking them what they're most passionate about, they were like, the nonprofit work that they do. I'm on the board of this foundation. I do this in the community. And I was like, all right, like, what is it that you wish you could be doing more of? And they're like, well, we have these board meetings quarterly and we don't do anything in between, and then we get into this fundraising season, which is usually around fall and the holidays. And a lot of the things that we planned out in our Q1 meeting weren't even talked about, done. There was no action. And that's when I was like, all right, like I'm going to launch this nonprofit consulting business. So that's kind of how my business started. Shortly thereafter, I launched my podcast because I started to see the power of my story. And I was like, there must be so many people who attribute shame or negative emotions to their story, and they need a platform to be able to share it. So that's me in a nutshell.
Yeah. So I think you took your addiction from one space and put it to another. And I think that what you thought was a bad part of your life and caused so much terror in your life and so much drama and trauma, you created it to be inspiring to other people. And little did you know that if you could have done this years ago, you could have been in a better spot. And so many people don't realize how powerful our story is. And everyone wants to write a book. Everyone wants to do this. Everyone wants to do this, but they have no purpose behind it. They feel like everyone just wants to listen. But if you can deliver something to somebody that's of value, and somebody who's going through the same personal experience, or somebody who's experiencing something, that is really tearing them apart and saying, wow, this guy did this and here's what he did. Just like, most of our guests have been through some sort of trauma in their life. And most entrepreneurs I know, and they say enough is enough. And that's when you go out there and you just spearhead life in front of you. And by people understanding who you are, and I think by you starting out in your nonprofit, like not trying to make money, but just trying to help people, that's huge. And we always talk about that. That's why we do the podcast. We try to deliver. We do 52 a year. If we can help 52 people, one person every episode, we've done our job. We're not trying to reciprocate money. We're just trying to get more people. And the amount of, comments that we're getting and, exposure that we're getting because other people are sharing these people's stories is what we're looking for. And by you being able to go out there and bring it to your marketplace, you see yourself in a totally different position. But let's explain to the audience, who's Adam now compared to who was Adam before, because you're a totally different person. And you probably go back and talk to people or see people or interact with people who knew the old Adam, and they can't believe the new Adam, right?
That is so accurate, man. I mean, one of the major things that I had to do, and I think you do that in any journey, whether it's an entrepreneur journey or your lifestyle journey, like one of the things I had to do was identify major turning points. When this happened, why did I shift into a self-destructive mindset, essentially? Me and my family, like I come from a good family. My dad's Indian, my mom's Persian Jewish. Like my dad worked for IBM for 40 years. Like we're never at a loss for anything. But understanding that every family has its secrets, every family has its story. And one of the major turning points for me was when me and my sister found out we were adopted. And up until that point, I was 13, everything was pretty much, I was that stereotypical Indian kid. I was getting good grades, people were cheating off me, like the whole nine, you know what I mean? And that's kind of when I was like, all right, like I don't know who I am. I need to figure out who I am. I got to be who other people want me to be. And, and that's where I, was like, all right, like I'm gonna hang out with this crew and I'm gonna kind of become a chameleon and soak in their image. And whether it involves drinking and partying, I'm gonna sign up for that, and very much through my life I was a chameleon, where I kind of just conformed to the environment that I was in. And unfortunately, that environment was oftentimes negative because that's where I would get the most eyeballs on me. That's where I'd get the most attention. And sooner or later, having the disease of alcoholism embedded in me, like, they were able to kind of continue on with their lives. And I was just kind of just in this rabbit hole. So that, after that major turning point, there was a lot of grief that happened where like I lost a bunch of friends on car accident, cancer. And then like I lost my mom at 26, and at that point, I was well deep into my addiction. And, during that period of time, I had tried to get sober. And, one of the big reasons that I named my podcast the Finding Purpose Podcast is because early on, in one of those early attempts, someone told me, they were like, listen, if you are doing this because of consequences, if you're trying to get sober because it's consequence-driven sobriety, it's not going to last. And that's something I attribute to everything, my business journey, my everything. If I do things in life because I'm trying to get something back or I'm trying to appease someone else, rather than I'm doing it purposefully with intention, it won't last. And that's the thing. And now, I don't really want to like hash out my story because it's very repetitive, man. Like, like I tried to get sober. I tell people if I wrote an autobiography, the title of it would be "This Time Would Be Different," because every time I got sober, I thought this time would be different, and every time I picked up a first drink, I said to myself, "This time would be different," and every single time it yielded the same results because it wasn't driven by purpose. This time when I got sober, it was having to hit that rock bottom, and I'd gotten arrested, I lost a job, my relationships were in shambles, I was very much alone, and in that juncture, I also had my health was being in jeopardy. And the doctor, is sitting across from you and telling you, hey, listen, man, your pancreas is going to explode if you continue to drink the way you're drinking. Never had my mortality been tested. And, you ever hear how they always say, like, a healthy person only wants to get better, nothing else matters. And that was that moment for me. And I knew what I had to do. And now, like, a lot of the things I've learned in that recovery space, it's like I apply that to business. Like, if my intentions need to be pure in any business transaction that I have. Like it needs to also come from a place of mutual growth and mutual, like just like, okay, like I work with you, the benefits are going to last and this relationship could be long standing, and prior to that, I was very transactional, and I don't know if I just answered your question, but I think I did. So, so like, that's kind of like how I was before, taker, transactional, really just trying to earn shit back, rather than have a lasting impact on people.
How do people who you were close to back then see you now? Like they see a totally different person, and is it hard for them to adapt to
those
this
circles?
It's funny because the people, when you make a commitment to change, oftentimes people just organically kind of filter off. I have had a lot of people being like, "Yeah, I'm proud of you." Like it's great to see what you're doing. And there's no bad blood between us, but it's just that like my interests now and the people who I want to do business with and associate myself with are very different than the people I wanted to partner with prior. But most of them are really proud of me. I'm not gonna lie. There's some folks who are resentful. I'm sure. But at the end of the day, I would have let that noise matter then.
Yeah.
I would have even asked myself. Like that would have mattered to me then. Now it's just like, like we're just on separate journeys. And if there ever comes a point where I can, add value to your lived experience, whether it's professionally, whether it's personally, and you're going through something, I'm happy to connect with you,
Have you changed any of those people from the past lives doing what you did?
Yeah. The people I hang out with now, like you really learn who are really on Team Adam, when, you come out of the darkness and you see who's standing around you. And oftentimes it was the people who you expected, like my close family. I got a couple good friends who I've had been friends with for years, who've stood by me. And, I may not have, if I was in their shoes. And, I keep the circle tight when it comes to that because I was a quantity guy before. Now I'm more of like a quality when it comes to relationships.
Yep, that's the way it should be.
Yeah, definitely how it should be. And it reminds me of a relationship. You said that those people who supported you maybe maybe you didn't take any of their advice at the time, or you dismissed them as they're not the crew that you're having fun with. So you when you were an addict, you just didn't dedicate any time to them. But I have a similar story, not for myself, but a friend of mine, also Indian. I'm not going to say his name, but went to a dark place, and we all dismissed him. Our group of friends dismissed him as a friend because we just don't get down like that, right? And we tried to help him, didn't work out, and shit, maybe 5 years later, he just sprung up like a brand new seed, and he was a new man. He said, "Hey, can you take me back?" And he's back, right?
Yeah.
Clean, sober, good man now, does all the right things. Had the similar wake up call, but you did mention twice and once in the intake form about being adopted. So I'm guessing that had some kind of effect on you. What was that effect?
That's a good question. So when I was 13 years old, so like my sister discovered that we were adopted, right?
Sister older or younger?
She's 14 months older.
How did she discover it?
Um,
It's like discovered. It's like
Yeah.
I'd imagine they would tell you, right? Like, hey, you're adopted. But
Yeah.
I guess that's not always the case. I just imagine if I had an adopted child. What
Yeah, well, it was funny because so like me, I was raised Jewish, which is crazy. My mom was part of Jewish. Went to Jewish day school from K through 5. Like always felt different because I was the only brown Jew in this. Ashkenazi, which is part of Jewish.
Threw me off if you came in with a yarmulke. I'm
Yo.
just gonna tell you that right now.
I put the yarmulke aside. But when we were 13, like it was shortly after we got bar mitzvah, and or she got bar mitzvah, and she would get these we had really wealthy cousins in Australia, and they sent her savings bonds, and she would file them, and she filed them in this filing cabinet. When she was doing that, she discovered adoption papers, and she sat on them for a little bit, didn't really know what to do, told me about them. I didn't believe her, and one day she showed them to me, and I was like, okay. And then one of my dad's close friends who he did grad school with was over with their kids, and they told my sister, you guys are adopted. So we're hearing it now from another human being.
Right.
And so now it's like, who's in on this fucking secret? How many fucking people know this shit? I swear to God, that's what it felt like, And then,
Everyone
we
but us.
sat on it. I think that was like May of 1998-ish. And it was like late August 26th was the date, 1998. And me and my sister and my mom were driving back from our local town park. And I'm sitting shotgun, my sister's sitting behind her. And we're bickering about something. And all of a sudden I just blurted out to my mom, Mom, are we adopted? And it's like the most beautiful day. It's like back to school. And it was silent the entire car home. And we get home. And she's like, go upstairs, clean up, come downstairs, and we'll talk. And I think for me, this is where I picked my reaction, is how they addressed it. We're sitting at this table. My dad and my mom are on one side, me and my sister on the other side. And they're like, we are adopted, and we didn't tell you because we thought people would look at you differently. We thought that we were going to tell you. We didn't know when the right time was to tell you, but we didn't want people to look at you differently. My 13-year-old mind, who already looked at myself differently for much of my, elementary years, just even further reinforced the fact that I am different. And I got angry. My reaction is anger. And I rebelled. And I...
It's the one question.
His mom's calling him right now.
No.
His mom's calling him heaven.
And and I didn't trust anyone. I lost any sense of trust. I lost any sense of just the family nucleus and whatnot. And my sister was very much opposite. She just kind of became a shell of her own self. She felt just hurt, I think. Can't speak for her, but that's how I felt. But I carried that lack of trust, and I carried that resentment for much of my, teenage life into early adulthood, where at this point I knew my parents felt bad, so I could manipulate them however I wanted. They would, I could play the game, and I got really good at manipulating them, and I got really good at. I knew that their guilt was large enough for them to bail me out of anything, and I ran amok. But at the end of the day, obviously, now that I look at it and I understand the underlying story, like that gave me a lot more clarity. I was adopted from India. At the time, I was like a very, very small baby. I was rejecting any like lactose, any food. My dad, having already adopted my sister from India, had him and my uncle were together, and they wanted to have a son, and they found me in this hospital where I was dying, and the doctor was like, he's not going to survive for like another 2 weeks. My dad flew back to the United States, got the necessary medication that wasn't available in India,
No shit.
brought it back. They treated me, and then I would spend the time recovering in India for a couple more months, and I would come home. So in essence, they saved my life. And obviously you could play the shoulda, coulda, woulda. Like you should have told that story at that table on that August day, but you didn't. And it's okay. And now I have a much better understanding and acceptance of it. But in the whole scope of things in life, like, and now having really just kind of worked on that part and understanding that, wow, like I shouldn't be here. Like everything is a gift, and I can't just, even in like the business perspective, it's helped me understand people who I do business with, because the one thing I always do is try to understand other people's perspectives. And because I'd learned already that my parents did the best thing that they could with the information they had in the moment, and it's no fault of them, because they were great parents, And I give people the benefit of the doubt where like I'm talking to them, talking about their vision for, say, an event, or I talk about who they want to help through their nonprofit, and I go, what's your why? That's such an important thing for me to ask in a business consultation. What is your why? Because then I can better understand their perspective, why they're passionate about it, why they want to impact these people, and a lot of times it yields these very personal stories. If you're raising money for, say, autism, it's like, no, like my second son, he was autistic. Like I've heard the craziest stories, and it also deepens that business relationship you have. So that's something that I've learned over the past several years, having made a decision to just kind of live differently.
When and how did you come to amends with your parents, and how did it feel?
I came to my amends with my mother on her deathbed, and
wow.
Like at this point wasn't really on her deathbed. It was right before she had a tracheotomy. My mom was diagnosed with leukemia back in 2011. She fought and fought and fought the best that she could, and about halfway through that fight, she needed a tracheotomy because that's the only way she would have been able to breathe. And I was the only one with her. And it was the day of, and we're at the hospital, University of Pennsylvania, and we're getting transported to this place where she's going to get a surgery. And before we leave, and they started reeling her out, she's like, I want to talk to you about something, because I think she knew that it might be the last time I'd ever be able to hear her voice. And she was like, I just want you to know that I did the best that we can, and I love you. And if there was one regret, that's what it would be. And that was closure, She said, I'm sorry. And I think that's really all I wanted, and I'm sorry. And God, bless her heart, I forgave her, and I hugged her, and I told her I loved her. And, and it was great, because that was the last time I heard my mom's voice. Then with my father, it took a while. For me and him are very similar people. He's a stubborn, old school Indian dude who it's his way or the wrong way. And that's kind of how it is. Now I understand him, but I never at one point ever tried to understand his perspective. And this was actually maybe like 2 years ago. I was like, all right, Dad, let's go to a diner, and we went to a diner. And we're sitting there, and I was like, listen, I just want to know your story, your side of the story. And that's when he told me that entire story where he flew back and they rescued me. And I was actually in India for like an extra 3 months, and he had flown back to the United States to take care of my sister and my mom while I was actually recovered to health, where I was cleared to leave the hospital. And he talked about that. And he was like, Adam, like, oh, I fell in love with you the second I saw you. He was like, and that was like the first time I've really had that in-depth talk, because every time I had brought it up before came from a accusatory tone,
right,
where he was automatically going to get defensive and say, we love you, like we provided you with this life, because that's his instinct, that's his first impulse. But when I was like, I want to hear your side of the story, and approached it from that way, I got a different reaction. And it was heartfelt. And to this day, me and my dad will always butt heads, and like I understand he's also like the type of person where there are people in your life, whether it's a coworker, whether it's a friend, whether where you got to be like, I could take you in doses. And that's what I do with my dad. I'm like, Dad, dude, what do you
Got people like that.
I got like 4 hours for you on Sunday. What do you want to do with it? You want to go to Costco? Sure. Like, let's go to Costco. I don't care. We could go look at fruit and get free samples. I don't care. My dad fucking loves Costco. But like, it's cool because setting those boundaries in that relationship with him has allowed our relationship to grow, and now we're in a much better place. But it took a long time for me to get not closure, but get at a place of peace in that all that with him.
How are you and your sister?
Oh, we're tight. We're tight.
You are.
Yeah, we're super tight. She lives in outside of Philly.
Now you two aren't related, and
No.
you adopt. Okay, it's
No.
completely.
So you
separate.
weren't brother and sister, totally
No.
different. I got it.
She was adopted like 14 months before, and then they went through the same agency and got us.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I mean, personally, I find adoption, people who adopt, very honorable, right? It's an honorable thing to do. You're taking someone else and you're loving them exactly how you would love your own. I mean, it's not that easy, right? And I'm sure you could realize that now.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, like, I'm not gonna lie, like I talk to a lot of my friends now who are having kids, and they're like, like Jenny wasn't really planned. You know what I mean? I talk to a lot of my friends like that, and I'm like, you know what? At the end of the day, my parents went and they sought me.
Yeah.
Like they wanted us, and when I think about it, it adds a lot of value to the whole experience and everything. And, like it's something I'm very proud of now, and I'm very proud of my parents for it,
Right.
but it took me a long time to get there.
My one cousin's adopted. He's like, I don't know, late 20s. He has no idea that, like real mom, but like that he doesn't know that his dad isn't his dad because he's always grown up with him.
He doesn't know
He has
now.
no
and
idea
does
now.
now.
Like,
If he
listen
listens
to
to
this
this
fucking
episode.
podcast.
My cousin, I don't know if they'll know who I'm talking about, but he has no idea. I have many cousins, but I'm just saying, like at the end
He's
of
the
the
next
day,
guest of the podcast.
Yo, all your cousins gonna be looking at their dads tonight.
I'm just saying, like my cousins told me, they're like, yeah, like so and so's not the father, and took him on young, and I'm like, are you ever gonna tell him? No, don't say nothing, And I feel like this kid can rebel. I mean, now man can rebel, like in a certain way. You go 20-something years without telling me that.
That's that was my question, right? Is it you were angry with them because you didn't know sooner, or just because you were not their child? Like, which one is it? And the follow-up
Because
question
he already
to that,
knew, I think, right? You already knew without knowing.
No,
maybe,
I didn't.
Maybe, well,
bro. Like if you looked at a picture of us growing up, you'd be like, "Oh, that's family." Like
that was my other question.
It
It's
felt
like,
like
okay.
this is how it looked like, dude. It felt like everyone was in on it, and no one told us.
Oh.
That's what it's. Everyone knew. It's not like my.
felt
There's
betrayed
no
almost.
pictures of my mom pregnant. You know what I mean? Like there's none. And everyone and people would say things like, "You have your dad's nose" or something, and I'm like.
It's just an Indian nose.
Yeah, dude. And I'm like, I find out, I'm like, fuck, I do. No, I don't have anybody's nose, And so like, I felt betrayed. I felt betrayed, and I felt that like everyone was in on this big secret, and the two people who should have been weren't.
Do you think that because of this, that resentment that you captured and carried with you, do you think that drove you in any way to be the person that you are today?
I think the taking from that lived experience, I think it's really important that I don't assume how other people feel. And I don't assume that just because someone made a decision that negatively impacted me, that it was intentional. And not everyone's out to get me. I'm not a victim. I think it allows me to really deflect like the victim mentality, which I do see prevalent. Where it's like, dude, like I was not a victim. I was blessed, and really look at everything as a silver lining. I think it has given me like more of a overwhelming sense of gratitude, frankly, where it's like, okay, I shouldn't be here.
Right. You literally
I shouldn't be here sitting on the couch talking to you guys. And I am. And it also kind of really makes me lean into the purpose side, which is why I named my podcast Defining Purpose, because I'm here for a purpose. There's the only way to explain it. I'm here for a purpose.
We all
And my job through my podcast and through the storytelling that bring guests on is for other people to hear how people charted that path to their purpose, because it doesn't come easily. Some people it does. Don't get me wrong. Some people it does. Mm-hmm. But for a lot of people, they have to really look at their lived experience, really look at the setbacks, and understand that those were all opportunities to learn about themselves rather than be resentful because it caused a negative consequence.
Did you ever try to find out who your real parents were?
I've thought about it, but I never have.
Do you know why you were up for adoption?
I'm assuming I always assumed that like it's a very poor country,
right,
and they were sick, and my birth parents didn't want me to die, and they left me at a hospital. And I think they were also looking out for my best interests.
We had an Indian guest not too long ago telling us how poor it is out there.
Well, yeah,
it's wild.
Fact, it's a very poor country. But
yeah,
on the up and up though.
Hey, listen, I'm working on it. You know?
You ever want to go back there?
I've been back a couple times. I've been back a couple times
with your dad.
Yeah, my dad actually. Most people go to like Florida in the winter. Like my dad goes to India and he hangs out with his brother, and they like he leaves the day after Thanksgiving. He leaves on Black Friday, and he usually comes back in March, and he spends spends the entire winter there. I mean, bro, it's like he probably spends $100 a month living there.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. And they travel sometimes. They'll go to like Australia to see. We have cousins in Australia. We have cousins in. I want to say like the Philippines are like they'll just travel. He just living life. So I haven't been in maybe since I was 19. So it's been a while for me.
What do you think about what you're doing now? Because I'm sure it was a struggle during your alcoholism. Your
this
abuse.
actually is a nice pivot into like business, because like our ideas of business and the approach to business are very different. And I think particularly with that generation where, my dad had a charted path, like he came to this country young, he got his PhD, he ended up accepting a job at IBM, worked there for 40 years, got married, bought the house, the script was written. And, I think when it comes to like entrepreneurship now, the script's not written, we write our own scripts. And that is something that generation isn't going to really comprehend, where we have to build relationships. Relationships are so important now in the entrepreneurship space in comparison to what my dad, had to experience, and he doesn't understand that. So now he's supportive, but he was certainly nervous when I was like, I'm leaving my good paying benefit job, and I'm going to dive into this space and really build a brand, and I'm going to build a brand around me. Maybe you don't think I'm that cool. No, I'm just kidding. But you know what I mean? Like, so I didn't expect him to, but now as he sees the people I'm collaborating with, and I know he listens to the podcast and he shares it, and he's attended my speaking engagements, and he's supportive the best he knows how to be. So
I always wonder if my dad listens to my podcast. If you are, shoot me a text.
Yeah.
I don't think you do that.
I don't think my mom does.
No, my dad definitely does.
No.
Like, leave a rating.
Mom, if you listen to this,
leave me a review,
Shoot
Pops.
me a thumbs up. Listen,
Come
heard
on,
my
dude.
name, right?
yeah, come on.
So where do you see yourself, like, with everything that you have planned and everything that you're doing? Like, what's your outcome 5 years from now? Like, where do you want to be, and how do you want to show up?
One of the things that I really want to be is a premier event management company in the Fairfield County and Westchester space. I love hosting events. I initially came out and I wanted to do the nonprofit consulting, and I'm gonna keep it real with you. Like, I'm not the best face to ask people for money for a cause per se, but I'm great at providing an experience and a environment where we can raise money, if that makes sense. So,
sure.
One of the first projects I worked on was with the Carlos Rodon Foundation, and that was Yankees pitcher Carlos Rodon and his wife Ashley. And I met Ashley because she was one of our clients at Equinox, and we connected, and she's an amazing human being. And they were raising money for IVF and IUI, or IVF grants. And their grant's called the Willow Grant, and they provide it for families who have repeated losses, and they provide them with money to get IVF. And it was one of the most rewarding experiences that I've ever had, but it also taught me a lot about myself. And it's kind of weird where I'm a unmarried man with no children asking people for money for IVF. And I didn't, as much fun as it was to meet the people in that community, hear some stories, connect with the donors, I really was really, I was super in love with the whole management of the event process. And like, we had a great production company. She has like this amazing girl, Elise, based out of Chicago, who does like the decor. We had a great venue hosted over in Greenwich, and just kind of like connecting everyone and building it out. And that was really where I felt where I was most effective, frankly. Where she was really great at like talking about her story and having people relate to that. So I fell in love with the event management side. So I learned a lot that, and that's why I wanted to pivot into that and really want to be a connector in the event space there, because I think there's so many like-minded folks who want to give back. But you know, fundraisers can be like annoying, you know, and that's the one thing I really liked about the way that we had designed that event, where there wasn't an auction where we were like going like, hey, like we're auctioning off this. It was a silent auction. It was available to all the fans. We raised a bunch of money. It was an experience. And I think that's where I am really good at building out experiences where people walk away from it and they're like, wow, like when's the next one? You know, that's how it should be done. You know, I go to so many different networking events and they all feel like the same thing, you know, like
business card handouts.
Business card handouts. Hey, what do you do?
An excuse to get drunk sometimes.
Yeah, like I never go to business. I never go to networking events that are open bar because it attracts people who are there for the open bar.
Yeah. How can we help you?
I mean, you listen. I mean, I'm always about sharing communities, and I think that the way you guys move and what you guys are doing here with Intrepidus is amazing, because you're building a community of purpose-driven entrepreneurs who have stories and who are trying to grow and collaborate. And I think collaboration is such a huge part of just business right nowadays. It's, you know, like, so like collaborating, you know, continue to collaborate, continuing to cross our networks and refer people to one another is going to be like super powerful in just kind of broadening both of our umbrellas.
Interested in doing what you're doing, but also have good communities and, you know, serve a good purpose. I mean, most every one of our guests has purpose, you know, for some reason, but there are some key people that we've had that can identify with, you know, what you're trying to do and where you're trying to go. I can help you as well with anything you want to do. I'd be more than happy to come to any of your events and help you out, do whatever I got to do. For me, it's, you know, I don't do shit for the money, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, not for nothing. A lot of our guests have I said it earlier today. It's a trend, you know. They hit rock bottom, and the beautiful thing about hitting rock bottom is there's only one way. It's up, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we could definitely link you up with some of the people for purpose too. I mean, we'd love to see them on your podcast. Shit, we'd love to be on your podcast, right? But
yeah, I'll be on his podcast.
He's like, I already locked it in.
Oh shit, I can get the invite. I'm sad. I'm gonna go cry now in the corner.
So, what advice could you give to somebody who is maybe in your position, who feels stuck, and just really needs to like get out of their own way, stop making excuses, stop playing the victim? What kind of advice can you give that person so that they can say, you know what, why can't I be Adam?
Well, I think a lot of it when it comes to, you know, this is an entrepreneurship podcast, so I'm definitely going to tie that in. You got to be a little crazy to be like an entrepreneur, you know, I feel like, but one of the biggest things is kind of just having the presence of mind to step back and be a little humble, because, you know, throughout the journey, you're going to have setbacks. You know, you're going to have something that didn't work out your way. Someone might not think the same way that you're thinking. People are going to say no. And that's just like part of the journey, and being able to handle that is really important. So my advice, you know, in that sense, when it comes to just not only starting a business, but like anything that you're doing, where it's trust that it's a process where no's happen for a reason. You know what I mean? Like, but like you got to take them in stride, and humility is key. You know, I think humility and just kind of deflating the ego a little bit, because, you know, sometimes when you lead with ego, then you miss an opportunity to learn, which I think that I was very, very, very much in the throes of when I wasn't listening to anybody but myself, you know, and that didn't help. You know, there are answers out there. Other people have them. It's okay to ask. Frankly, people love when you ask them questions. They do. You know?
So you basically got to grow through things.
Yeah.
How does personal development play a part in your life? Because Just like kind of seeing your Instagram, seeing stuff that you're going through, and seeing who you are. You obviously are involved in personal development. It plays an important role in your life. How has that changed and spearheaded, where you're going?
Personal development, was a huge part of my journey. Listen, I do a 12-step program, and I, learn a lot there, and I do apply that to my life on a daily basis. And then, at the same time that I started that, I also jumped into this personal development space, which, I love because being around like-minded folks is so key to growth. And one of the things I heard early on was like, get into the rooms that you're not supposed to be in. And once you're in those, you'll eventually, people will see you and they'll know you, and it'll be a room that you belong in. And that's how you kind of just step up. And that's what I've been doing, just like, like I'm not supposed to be in a room of, millionaire folks who are, donating to causes and whatnot. But I was like, you know what, like I'm going to just become the, expert in this field. Why not? Like, who's going to tell me that I can't be? Right. And the relationships that I've been able to attract by just putting myself in these spaces have been so valuable. So in regards to personal development, that's a huge lesson that I learned from that. The other one really is the value of your story and discipline. Discipline is a huge part of me reshaping the way that I see and look and move. Keeping, I think I got to shout out Ed Milet because I love Ed Milet. And, I think I heard a reel where he was like and this was early on in my recovery and personal development journey, where he was like, you got to build, the way to build confidence is to keep promises to yourself, little promises to yourself. And then, that speech of the admiral over at the University of Texas where he's like, make your bed and you'll change the world. Like those are two huge things that I have taken along my journey. It's like the little habits matter the most, and that's how I did it from day one. Like day one, it was like, I need to make my bed. I need to wake up at 5 a.m. I need to go to the gym. And these small little promises like built confidence, because I think at the end of the day, I came from a place where I had no self-love, self-confidence, self-esteem, nothing, and I'm not going to build all of that in a week. And I was very much addicted to instant gratification. And I think a lot of people are, because they look on Instagram and they're scared and they're like, oh, like this person's doing this. I don't do this. This person's doing this. Why aren't I doing this? But, like if you just kind of, get into tunnel vision to your mission, your purpose, and you keep those small promises to yourself, the self-respect comes back. The self-esteem comes back. And it's like a ladder, man. The self-worth comes back. And eventually, I think we're all trying to get to that place of self-love. Mm-hmm. And, am I there yet? I'm starting to love myself more and more each day. But it's because I'm holding myself accountable and keeping those small promises to myself. And I'm making my bed each day and trying to change the world.
It's about, we can't achieve perfection, but we could sure as hell chase it, right?
Yeah. And we could sure as hell make progress each and every day.
But they just like the people at Equinox that
fuck yeah, dude.
You modeled your life after, more or less, right?
$240 a month, but they're making progress.
They're doing something right. But
did you read Ed's book, The Power of One More?
I did. I love it.
Good book.
Yeah.
Good book.
Yeah, that's actually how I knew I was going to date my girlfriend. I saw as soon as I walked into her bedroom for the first time, The Power of One More was sitting there. I was like, okay,
really?
All right, we got to keep her here.
Love that, dude.
That's the one I'm going to involve with. But so, question, my favorite question, as Dan would like, as he's smiling here, smirking about the question. Every single one, you have to know. I have to know because I struggle with this personally. But what keeps you up at night?
That's a good question. I sleep pretty well, but the nights that I don't, it's worrying about something that isn't here yet. And I try to train my mind to not worry about something that isn't here yet. And sometimes there are those nights when you're worrying about, it could be, how someone's going to react if I do this, those little things. Mm-hmm. And it's hard, man. It's something I have to work. Most nights I do sleep pretty well, I'm not going to lie. But I'm not going to lie. I don't know why, I just do. But when I do find myself up at night and overthinking, it's the overthinking, man, always, I heard someone say something yesterday, actually, and she was talking about fear, and she was talking about like how her son had really, really bad epilepsy, and he was gonna die. And she goes, I had played so many different scenarios of how he was gonna die, and I feel like I robbed myself of the time that I had spent with him, because when it did happen, I finally just went through it. You only have to go through things once, and if you continue to playing out different scenarios, you're taking away the value of the time that you have. And so I do my best not to overthink and keep myself up at night. But that's when I am up at night, I worry about things that haven't even materialized, man. And I shouldn't be losing sleep over.
So many people get caught up in that. I talk about it all the time, like those shower conversations, right? People sit there and shower, and they're going into a meeting. They're going to talk to someone, an opportunity, whatever it is, good, bad, whatever it is. And they have this whole like preconceived way of how they're going to deliver it, or how they're going to. And it never happens that way.
It never does.
I always tell people, you spend so much time, thinking about how you're going to say something. Like even on your way to a meeting, even on your way here to the podcast, you're like, what am I going to talk about? Here's what I want. You know what I mean? And like you always kind of think about this stuff. We were talking about something earlier when you came here. We're talking about sending a message to somebody, that we have to send a message to, right? So, we think about this stuff, and however we play it out in our mind, we spend so much time playing this out, and it's never going to happen that way. So I always tell people, like, listen, 99% of things that you play out are just like the things you worry about that never happen that way. Like, life already has the way it's going to coming out.
Exactly.
And no matter how you think of it or try to put a spin on it, it's not going to happen that way. So just like let it naturally happen, let it naturally go, and you can't go back and be like, oh, well, I should have done this. Well, you wouldn't have done that.
Well, I mean, frankly, a lot of the things that I worry about are things that I procrastinated with. So it's my fault. Like if I had just taken action when I should have, I probably wouldn't be up at night thinking about it, right?
That's exactly how my night terrors revolve around.
Yeah, it's like, oh shit, I didn't do this. Oh, I should have done this. Why wasn't this on my to-do list? Or it was on my to-do list, and I just I'm afraid of how someone's going to react. I'm afraid I'm going to get a no, so I don't send that email. I don't send that text message. Rather than and so then I'm sitting there at night, like I should really do that,
Yep.
And it's like, bro, like this is all self-created, it's crazy.
How about going into your first speaking gig? Were you afraid? Because personal speaking is not my thing. So, keynote speaking is something I'd love to do one day. However, just thinking about it gets my hands sweaty, right? So how exactly did you have fear walking into that? And then how did you overcome it? And if
I have fear every single time I have to speak publicly.
Now.
Every single time I have to speak publicly, I have fear for that first, I would say 30 seconds to a minute.
Okay.
And it's funny because it's totally an unnecessary fear. And I relate it also to my event fear. And I'll jump into that in a second. So for the first 30 seconds when I'm speaking, I think it's just a traditional like butterflies and whatnot. But there's a thing in my brain that just snaps and I just, boom, just say what I have to say. And now I'm more addicted to that adrenaline rush where I'm able to be like, all right, this happens every time. All right, now let's just talk. My event fear, though, is even more unrealistic and crazy. Anytime I host an event, we were setting up, we get there a couple hours early. I have this unrealistic fear that no one's going to show up. And it's impending and it's strong. And I'm like, I just wasted all my time. And I'm playing this worst case scenario. No one's going to show up. And then people start showing up. I'm like, okay. Then another person shows up. I'm like, okay, then the room's packed. And I'm like, okay. Dude, it's the most unrealistic fear. But I remember the first time I spoke, I was very scared because I was sharing things that I'd never shared before. Mm-hmm. And it was embarrassing. And I still had that shame. I'm a very different person from that first time where now I just really unpacked a lot of my personal story with you guys. That would have caused a lot of fear, but it's comes with the work I've done when it comes to that personal development, where it's part of the story and I got to accept it, and I understand that for me, the consequences of not accepting, the consequences of making up narratives, the consequences of manipulating a story to make me look better. If I start doing that and I start incorporating that kind of mindset, it'll eventually snowball and I'll be sitting at a bar ordering a Jameson. So understanding that it's all encompassing for me is really important for me to be as transparent as I can with my story. So now I don't really, either you're going to look at me and I'm going to share an honest truth about myself and you're going to feel like some type of way about me. Like, you feel however you want to feel, because there's also a large swath of people that might hear my story and be like, wow, I could relate to that. That could empower me to make a change in my life. And that's really who I care about.
Being nervous when you speak is like reaction and interaction.
Yeah.
You're nervous about that first reaction, and you want to make sure you're interacting with the crowd. So you're always up there, like you're fine-tuning, your mind's going where your mouth's not going, and you're not sure what your first word should be.
Mm-hmm.
I've done it so many times when you go out there, but then you just go, you know what? Whatever, I'm here to deliver something, and as long as you can have like the crowd moving in any which way.
Yeah.
When they're sitting there like this, waiting for you to say something, that's the most
It's
intimidating part.
crazy.
Getting the first few words out is very difficult.
Yeah. Well, I worked with a public speaking coach. His name is Brandon Godoris, and he's the one who does the public speaking seminars. And he got me into some good habits. Like when you're going to do a keynote or whatever, rehearse it 5 times. Do it on video. Watch yourself on video. See your body language. Those type of things were really important for me to, and it sucks watching yourself on video and being like, oh, fuck, look at me, Like, it really does. You're like, I'm standing there like this.
Yeah.
So there were minor tools. I think like with anything else, speaking is something that you have to practice. And, you get what you put into it, like anything else. And I watch myself speak and then I'll watch someone else speak and I'll be like, damn, they're great. So it's also like kind of eliminating that comparison game, because like the way I speak is going to be different than that person. And they are just a little more polished because they may have been doing it longer. It's fine. But we each have our own message when we speak. So, but working with a coach was really important for me initially because it built my confidence. It got rid of some habits that you don't even realize you're doing. And it allowed me to really streamline my message, rather than go off on a tangent, because I can do that sometimes. It's like, well, I'm talking about one thing and then next thing I'm talking about, like, my drive to work and I flick someone off or something, it's like how the two relate, but it's really about just getting everything, getting the messaging clear and getting the nuances out of it.
That's just a product of being an entrepreneur. I think the prescription is ADD is required in order to
Dude,
be an
yeah.
entrepreneur, or an entrepreneur becomes something with attention deficit disorder. I don't know which way, but
It's because we got to multitask.
you do, and your mind's in several different directions at any given moment, and you can't really pin down exactly what you need to do, because you need to do 5,000 things, but you need to focus on one, and that's the key, really, is focusing on the whatever one thing that you need to do, get it done, move on to the next thing. But then you get the night terrors, and you're like, oh, well, I should have done that one thing. But you did say something that I want to tune into a little bit, and you said that, and I'm curious about your journey, your first ever public speaking event versus, maybe your last one. You said that you had a coach. They were phenomenal. So mentorship is really important to you and your development and where you are today. But public speaking is one of those things where I know that I used to believe, and I think a lot of our guests may believe the same thing, is it's something that you're either, born with, and you can't necessarily learn. But you said specifically, you have gotten better. You can get better. It's one of those things you just keep doing and you just become a better speaker. Can you talk a little bit towards that?
Yeah. So, I mean, you're going to have to want it. You're going to have to want to share your story. I think that one of the things that he told me early on was facts tell, stories sell.
Mm-hmm.
So that was really important, because that's also when I started to study different speakers, the way that Brandon does. And you listen to the way they speak. And it's funny because sometimes I'll go to events with Brandon and we'll hear a speaker, and he'll be sitting next to me and he'll be like, this is why I don't do this. This is why I don't do that. And it's like I'm getting this live coaching while we're watching a live speaker. And, you can't get better. A lot of people go out and they speak, and it's also what you're going to identify with. Like, if you want to identify with like a wide swath of people, fine. But if you want to kind of just fall into your niche, you can become, a voice in that respective space. For me, I do lean into the recovery. I do lean into some of the family trauma. And then I lean into the giving back and the purpose. And sometimes, I tie in nonprofit, but for me, it's knowing what I am good at speaking about, and it's based on the wealth of knowledge that I've accrued over my lived experience. Then you have speakers who just come in and they stand in front of a screen, and they're basically reading off the screen and calling it a speech. Fine. I mean, if you want to do that, that's more of like a presentation. It's really about what you're getting out of the audience, and knowing how to engage an audience. I think that's where you separate like the true speakers rather than the presenters. I think a lot of presenters do call themselves speakers, but if you're getting a reaction from an audience, and you could tell, like, when I spoke at Braden's conference, he does an annual conference every year in Stamford, Connecticut. It's called A to B Con. And I spoke last May. You could hear a pin drop when I was speaking. And, I shared some of my experience, and then I promoted the event that I was working on at the end. But that's when like, okay, like you got something. And I didn't have it right away. The first time I spoke, it was just kind of me like really sloppily laying out my story. And even then I got a reaction. But as I learned to streamline it and pivot and intertwine personal stories into the messaging, that's when you're going to reach someone, because they're going to be like, you know what, like, oftentimes it may not be exactly like your story, but they can relate to the emotional roller coaster that accompanies it. And that's what you're trying to establish, that emotional connection. Like, I also was at a point in my life where I felt completely different. I also was in a point in my life where I didn't feel wanted. I was also in a point in my life where I was at a mental and emotional bottom, And once you can connect with someone on that deep level, they will listen to you talk about it.
Yeah. I make sure I instill that in all of my podcasts I do myself. And it's important. If you look at all these influencers in the world, like, they have no value. They bring no value. They have no experience. They haven't been doing anything. And every time I deliver something, even if it's here on Intrepidus, I try to bring like a life experience, a life story, because that's how people relate. So many people that get behind a microphone, get behind a camera, post on social media, their fucking life is such bullshit, but they try to go out there and present, sell programs, coach people. And these people are getting money every single week, every single month to coach people and bring value of things that they don't even know about, and they're presenting. They're asking how to give someone this information versus me. Like, listen, I can come on your podcast. I can go in front of us. I don't need to rehearse myself. Tell me what you need me to tell people. I'll add my story to it. I'll go up there raw and I'll hit it. That's like when we do these podcasts, like you said an intake form, dude, I don't even read it.
Yeah.
I don't need it. You know what I mean? Like, because at the end of the day, like, I just want to know you. I want to go raw. I'm not trying to prepare, and at the end of the day, that's how I deliver. I don't want to know anything. It's better for me to remotely come across somebody based on genuinely seeing how they are and going into an avenue or a direct space of them not knowing where I'm coming from to see how they truly answer. That's how I know. And then if I have to deliver something, every time I have a podcast, whatever the topic is, I talk about in my experience. And some time ago, here's what happened to me, and boom, 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 boom. So that people are like, wow, like, he's fucking went through this shit. Most people don't go through anything, but everyone wants to be a speaker. Everyone wants to have a podcast. Oh, I want to start a podcast. Yeah, go ahead. It's going to cost you a fucking shit ton of money. You got nothing to bring to the fucking market.
Yeah. Well, I think it has to do with kind of what's your why, kind of circling back to that. If your why is only to monetize, and don't get me wrong, listen, monetizing is important. I love nice things. I love making money. I love being secure. I love the freedom that money gives me. But if that's my only why, then these people also just trend. Yeah. But when you have a message and you have a story and you have the experience to back it up, and people buy into you as a person, they're gonna buy into you as a business also. Yeah. And that's where I think it's important. The people who have been successful, like generationally, like they had a clear, defined why, and it was something bigger than them. And, I think that's where I kind of lean into. It's like lean into my why, lean into also the desire to help others. And when you lean into that rather than, like I'm just going to create this AI image and I'm going to pump out this AI little workshop and I'm going to just keep, pumping in an algorithm. And yeah, I'm going to sell, I'm going to make money, but I'm not meeting people face to face because, if they meet me, like they'll see what a fugazi I am. You know what I mean? Like that's like, do you, bro? Like, that's fine. If that's what these folks that you were talking about refer, that's fine. But when it comes to longevity, what you guys are doing here, like you guys are real people talking to real people about their real journeys. And that's so much more powerful than any of those, douchebags who are sitting there saying they are what they aren't.
I got a crazy message yesterday. I met this guy 26 years ago. I was 17 and I was just getting involved in business. And this guy literally messaged me out of the blue. I haven't seen this guy in probably 20 years. And he wrote, let me just bust it out.
You know what I find interesting?
What's that?
Is that we're talking about the clout and the Instagrammers and the influencers and the people that really don't deliver shit to you except for their experience, which doesn't really exist. It's just a bunch of photos and bullshit. But before the pod, we were talking about the event that you're pulling for Lamborghini.
Yeah.
Fucking cool, right?
Yeah.
That's amazing. This guy's hosting an event for Lamborghini. Not once did he mention it. Not once did he bring it up. He just talked about his story, not about what he's done. It's about his life and why he is here today and his experience and why people should be listening to the pod.
100%.
Yeah, well, I think that like I treasure those kind of relationships, man. I think that I think it's awesome that I'm building out this event with Lamborghini and we're doing this launch, but I'm really, really like the woman who I'm working with on this at Lamborghini. The relationship that I have with her, like, is awesome. Jolanta, like she's amazing. She's the one who I met through the gala. She sponsored the gala, and then me and her did a one-on-one. We immediately hit it off, and I was like, "Let's do it." Like that. It's funny because Lamborghini, like, is who she represents, right? But like that's who I think I fall so in love with the behind the scenes, and one of the biggest things for me is doing that work that no one talks about that yields a result. The result's going to show. I'm confident in that. I'm addicted to that. Past 9 o'clock in your office, sending emails, going to a site and after the gym and walking through and painting the image of this is going to be there. This is going to be there. That's what like really gets me, man.
Thrill.
But I appreciate that plug though. Like that is going to be a sick event on May 22nd, and but it's a testament to the partnerships that I'm building. I can never do any of it by myself. And 3 years ago, prior when it was all about Adam, I would have been talking about how great I am and look at me. But I also know that what's the point of that,
Right.
So I never had my phone with me over here, but for some reason I had it here. I put it down. This guy Joe, I met him 26 years ago. He writes to me yesterday. I met Dan when he was 17. Other than myself, one of the hardest working kids I've come across, the most talented, 100% risk taker. In my 42 year in business, I've never met anybody like him. I knew when I met him he was going to be successful. I told his story to people when they would ask me how lucky I was. I would say the harder I worked, the luckier I got. I'm super proud of you. Do you remember when you were a mason at 17 and you built my brick mailbox? What the hell did you know about being a mason? I didn't care if it fell down, but I knew it would come out good. To this day, there's still no other power in looking at that thing and realizing the only thing I need to do is power wash it when it gets dirty. The mortar's still perfect, and you did a great job. Like, I haven't talked to this guy in 20 years.
Dude, I love that.
Yeah, that's amazing.
You know why I love that, though? It shows your mindset back then. So one of the things I am doing, and I will talk about it because it's such a powerful initiative that I'm working on with my friend Beth Brown, who is a forgiveness coach, and she has a photography business. And we're building a workshop. So one of the speaker schools that I did for Brandon was in New York City. And during that speaker school, we were able to go into New York City public schools and speak to kids, both in a classroom setting and an auditorium setting. And I really got a lot out of it because these kids were just like so engaged and they were so happy that we were like coming in and talking to them about what they're interested in, where they want to go, and what they need to avoid, and what lessons that we have now that we wish we heard when we were their age. So now me and my friend Beth are building together this workshop where it's a personal development club, and we're bringing it to New York public schools. And one of the guys who is Brandon's partner, his name's Carl Michelle, and he does this podcasting club. And he brings his podcasting clubs to New York City schools, and he's someone we consulted on it, where we were like, hey man, like we built this out. We know how we want to structure it. We have all the graphics for it. We want to send it out to superintendents and whatnot, because the way the public school budgets work, they actually usually are kind of like closing it around this time. Mm-hmm. So you want to get it in so that you can slip it into the last minute budget. And he was like, bro, like, just so you know, like when I sent out my podcasting initiative, I don't really know what I was doing. I just sent it out to see like whether there's interest. He was like, so send them out this week. Send them out. And it's just a testament to exactly what he just said. Like, what did you know about building a mailbox? But you had that confidence in yourself, and you went out there and you were like, I'll put together the best mailbox you ever fucking seen, man.
Bricks.
And this guy's still talking about it. But it's having that mentality that Carl told me. He was like, dude, just send it out. Yeah. It'll all come to you. You'll build it. You'll grow. You guys will be great. And it's like, I needed that push, because I'm thinking like, all right, like maybe we should wait till August and send it out for the fall budget. And he was like, no, send it out now. And I was like, all right. And hopefully by fall, it's in like 30, 40 different, New York public school inboxes, by August, we're like pumping these things out, So sometimes having that push, and, it kind of goes to the mentorship, but like, I love that, like that email, man, because it showed that you had that mentality when you were fucking 17. Yeah. That's crazy.
Yeah. I love that. I mean, yeah, this guy pushed me to do the podcast. He's like, you want to do a podcast? I was like, sure. Hate the camera, hate speaking. I used to get sweaty palms. This guy just, nothing bothers him. Nothing. But I was so fearful in front of the camera. Didn't know what to say, how to say it. My tone was off. I was like shaking. Thought that everything out of my mouth would sound silly. And he's like, don't worry, it'll get better. And now, now I have an OnlyFans account. I'm just kidding. I don't know.
Oh, shit.
But, I could get in front of a camera and take my clothes off if I really needed to, right? But I won't, by the way. You won't be that lucky. But anyway, really enjoyed having you on.
Yeah.
Definitely enjoyed our time together. Dan will say the same. But, you do a lot. So I'm not going to run through everything that you do. For you to plug away. Tell everyone how they can find you if they're looking for anything that you currently do, or looking for advice. You seem to be a person that loves to give advice.
I appreciate that, man. Adam Vohra, guys, thank you. I'm really grateful to be out here, man. This is a sick studio. I love what you guys do, and I'd love to reach out to anybody who is interested in either hosting a high-end event, anybody who really wants to get their story out there on how they overcame certain demons to really be grounded in their purpose. I do speaking engagements. I'd love to talk to any community you're in, and we could dive in there. And regardless, you can reach out to me on Instagram at @AdamVohra_, or you can reach out to these young men, and they'd be happy to connect you with me, I hope, right?
We'll have Adam's link on this podcast, and we really appreciate you guys tuning in. If you're not following us on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, go ahead and do so. We appreciate the algorithm. Thanks for tuning in.
Love you guys.